Welcome to the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute. If you were to identify your own Mount Rushmore, a handful of people who have had the most positive influence on your life, who would you identify? Today's guest, Dr. Martin Jones, would likely be on the very short list of being one of those people for me. When I decided to pursue a PhD as an extremely non-traditional student at the age of 50, Dr. Jones, along with Dr. Mark Wilson, took a chance on me and essentially adopted me as their much older son during the process. Thanks to the two of them, the PhD journey, which many students frankly describe as a living hell, was one of the best experiences of my life. Today, you'll get to tap into some of the knowledge and insights about human performance that first drew me to Dr. Jones as a mentor. Did you know you can earn continuing education credits now for listening to this podcast? Absolutely. We were super excited about this. We've been working on this for months. If you're looking for MBHWC credits, all the details are available at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. It is a specific list of podcasts right now, so read the details carefully and reach out to us anytime. Email us results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com, and that email is available to any of you who have any questions about coaching, future career, current career, etc. For everyone else, if you enjoy videos, you may want to check out the YouTube coaching channel. It's youtube.com/coaching channel. We now have over 60 videos. It covers health, wellness, performance, and how to make the most of your coaching business and your coaching career, and all of those are freely available to you. Now, let's step up our game with insights from Dr. Martin Jones on the latest episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast. Dr. Jones, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Well, let's jump right in. How can individuals elevate their performance without illegal drugs? Obviously, we've all run down that path in the press lately. Or is that not really an option? Do we just generally hit a plateau and stay there?
I think that the illegal drugs issue, they're clearly performance enhancing, but obviously it's a hack. It's a way of doing it illegally, and often the results might be quicker, but there are definitely ways to elevate performance with really simple things that you can do legally. I mean, the obvious one is making sure that you're looking at your sleep, you're getting the right sort of the right sleep and trying to minimize your fatigue. That's an obvious one. My area, obviously being a psychologist, I look at that. The things that we can control within our own mind, our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors. And if we can tap into some of those things, you definitely can elevate your performance quite a significant amount. And I think in my experience, working with elite athletes who they've observed their competitors who might be on the performance enhancing drugs, what you see is people elevate their performance, and then with illegal drugs, what you see is that plateau stays really steady. Whereas people who are clean, you'll often see those kind of peaks and troughs. So some days their performance will be really good, the next it will be off a little bit, and you can see that variability. Whereas with performance enhancing drugs, that variability tends to just kind of be diminished or even disappeared. So what we can try and do is, in the first instance, is get people up to elevate their performance up to that plateau, and then we can try and think about the ways of minimizing that sort of amplitude of the performance, of how it goes up and down. And that comes from lots of different things. That as a sport and exercise scientist, I kind of try and think of it in an interdisciplinary way. I mean, it's not just about psychology. We have to look at how all these different systems come together. We think about performance as a developmental system, where I like to use the analogy of you baking a cake, and the cake has got lots of ingredients in it. And if you were to leave some ingredients out, it's fundamentally not a cake. So if you leave out your flour, it's not a cake. If you leave out your eggs and your sugar, it's not a cake. But if you leave out that kind of vanilla essence, you still get a cake. It's just not quite as nice. It's just not quite as good. And sometimes the performance psychology is those little ingredients that can just enable you to just get above that level, just help you push on to that to the point where you really want to be. So yeah, it's not necessarily the panacea for performance. If you just work on your psychology, then you'll be fine. you have to recognize it as one of those parts of that broad developmental system that can improve your performance.
But I think it's a good point, because so many folks, I run in the triathlete runner world, and so many folks are spending hours and hours and hours swimming, biking, running, doing their core training, and nothing on the cognitive side. Are there some general cognitive strategies that you've looked at that you think might be helpful to folks in this setting to say, oh, wow, yeah, I hadn't thought about that?
Yeah, absolutely. What I like to do, if we just broadly call them life events, these can be a performance in a given sport. It could be a wedding. It could be moving jobs. These things that happen to us in life, these things that that we all go through. That it's the waves of life that just keep coming, and we can think about a temporal sequence of things we can do before an event, things that we can do during an event, and things that we can do after an event. If we lay them out into that order and think about what is it that we have coming up, so we can have effectively what we call these normative events. So you're about to run a triathlon, right? Brad, you're going to run your next Ironman. That's coming up. You've got your date set, and you can start periodizing. You can do that. You could also have non-normative events. So you break a leg in the lead up to that event. You have an injury, or something. Someone steals your bike. Something that you don't expect, which interferes. So we can think before those events happen. We can spend some time anticipating. We call this anticipatory coping. We can anticipate what we expect to happen, and I think this is where you can do this on your own. I think if you're working with a coach, or you're working with someone who's got experience to draw upon, so they can help you with the things that they know is going to happen. It's like, if you're going to go up a mountain, you could just go up a mountain on your own. But if you've got a mountain guide, they can get you up there quicker and safer.
Good analogy.
You can anticipate what's going to happen.
Right.
So what we can do that with a coach and think, what have we got coming up? And that's where we can have these before event strategies. Like our goal setting is an obvious one. That's going to drive your behavior. That's going to give you something to aim for. It's going to give you something to measure against. We can do things recognizing that probably during an event, maybe something like attention's important. So we can in the lead up to that event, we can practice our attention. We can do it like attentional control training, where we actually practice these things in training. So that's those cognitive strategies and emotional strategies and behavioral strategies. We can do them months in advance, and that's kind of like the mindfulness meditation. That practice of sitting down and being mindful in the present moment, and just being aware of your bodily sensations. And that's not necessarily something that you're going to do in competition. You don't want to be like that if you're hammering down a descent down a mountain. You want to be aware of the turns and the sheep in the road and that kind of thing if you're on a bike. So that kind of being the practice of mindful meditation is a pre-event skill, which allows you to become aware of present moment. It allows you to be that encourages a skill that then you can use during the event. So some of them seem quite abstract sometimes. So like imagery, typically people don't use imagery when they're in an event. You use it before, you practice it in the lead up to it, because the function of imagery might be motivational. It can psych you up, or it can help you relax, or it can help you develop a skill or a strategy. So you're practicing these things before the event. So during the event, I think things like self-talk are huge. I think positive self-talk, or when I say positive self-talk, I think within certain bounds, we need to make sure that we're not grandiose. We're not trying to fool ourselves with statements that just aren't true. We have to make sure they're matched to our competencies and the situation that we're in and our emotion. If you're feeling really anxious, if you just say, you feel fine, you feel great, that's not going to work. Self-talk needs to kind of tap into that anxiety and say, right, yes, you feel anxious. This anxiety is going to be performance enhancing, because it's meaning my adrenaline's going. It's meaning that the blood's moving in the right place. So, you're not replacing it. Positive self-talk isn't necessarily just these positive affirmations for the sake of it. We can use self-talk to maybe shift our perspective in the moment. So they're good execution skills, if you want to call them that, during the event. you could even kind of think about like immediately before an event, like you kind of pre-game routine. And if you know that you're the kind of person, if you're waiting to go out for that tournament, or you're standing on the side of a stage ready to give a big presentation, things like box breathing, simple relaxation techniques in that immediate time before, they can be performance enhancing. More than anything, in my experience, those sorts of pre-execution skills are almost like they're kind of like a buffer. So the analogy that I sometimes give is, if you imagine you've got a glass, like a pint glass, and we think about that glass is like our kind of our attentional capacity. And what can sometimes happen is that glass could be half full. We've got half of the glass available. Our attentional capacity is not used up, and task irrelevant things can kind of creep in. So we can start worrying. We can start thinking about, oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? We start moving into present thinking, or we shift back to something that's happened in the past. So what we can have control of is we can fill that glass with benign or just buffering sorts of thoughts. So pre-shot routines. I've done stuff before where I encourage people to count backwards from 100. So it's just something that fills in their kind of attentional capacity, so that those task irrelevant thoughts don't get in. They're using just something benign. It's just something that's almost buffering out those things. And then finally, the post-event strategies. We can think about, that journaling, the kind of reflective activity where we're looking back at what happened and trying to make sense of it, both the good and the bad, and then that can inform that next round of anticipation moving forward. So there's loads of things. I mean, that's a real whistle-stop tour of cognitive strategies, but there's literally hundreds. But in my experience, breaking it down into those kind of time periods, I think is really effective.
Great job setting the baseline. Let's come back to the goal setting, because that's something that the folks listening to this, coaches, athletes, high performers, they're like, oh yeah, I set goals. Can you take us down that path a little bit more about why that's so powerful in terms of the performance enhancing aspect, when maybe they haven't accessed some of the potential with this?
Yeah. So goal setting is an interesting technique. In my own experience, I don't think I've ever met anyone that's never set a goal. The way they do it is different.
Okay.
But everybody, I think, has that experience of saying, I'm currently here and I want to move there. And so the New Year's resolution is an obvious one. People have experience of doing these things. But the paradox, I guess, is that although people are accustomed to setting goals, you get many people who don't necessarily follow through. The New Year's resolutions, for example, people often don't make it past January.
Right.
So the question is like, why? So we know that the research shows us that there is a relationship between goals and performance in the broad sense. And the research shows us these kind of mechanisms of why goal setting can increase your performance. So I think it happens through different pathways. I think one thing, it improves your self-efficacy beliefs. If you set yourself goals, it starts tapping into that sense of your belief that you can do it. If you are a coach or you are working with a coach, you can have self-set goals or coach set goals. And I think that can be a really driving motivational force. If your coach gives you some positive feedback about, I think you can achieve that goal, that's going to motivate you. Or even a coach says, here's a goal that I think you could achieve, that tells the athlete, that tells the client that you have confidence in them, that you believe that they're able to do it. So I think that's one thing. Goal setting can definitely drive. It has a motivational aspect. It puts a bit of fire under you and it gives you that kind of direction and intensity of effort. So I think that's the one thing. It has an attentional component in that you now know where you're going. You've got that something to aim at.
Right.
You could get into your car, you could just drive, and you might end up at the destination, or you might end up at a destination that is good for you, but you could end up anywhere. Whereas you put something in the sat nav, you've got that endpoint, you've now got your turn left, turn right. You've got your roadmap. You know where you're going. You know how to get there, and that's what goal setting does. It gives you the end point. You know when you've arrived because you've got something. If you do a goal setting effectively, you've got something measurable, specific, and it also the process aspect. It gives you the turn, the left, the right, but importantly, it also gives you the jump off points. It gives you the goal disengagement points when you know that you've gone down the wrong path. Because you've set those goals and you've got that process, you recognize that you're going down the wrong path and you do the U-turn,
right,
and you can re-engage in a different goal. So it has that attentional component as well.
Okay.
And obviously the behavioral sides, it's a goal setting is a doing activity. It typically, when people set goals, it's, I want to lose 10 pounds or I want to get 2 minutes quicker. There's always then that's great, but how do you then do it? And you've got that behavioral aspect. Goal setting, I think, is incredibly powerful if you do it well. When I used to teach this, when I was teaching within universities, I used to take an approach of trying to act like the goal setting detective, where you find a goal that you didn't achieve and then kind of break it down and think, well, why didn't you achieve it? So you can look at aspects like some people just don't have that commitment to the goal, that they set something that they're not actually, it's not important to them. And I know we've talked about this before, Brad, that kind of vision. How much of that is that the person you want to be, rather than just some kind of arbitrary endpoint? And I think if it's personal, if it's really integrated, and it's like, I want to be that person, or that is something that's really important to me, and you've got that extra commitment, I think that helps. I think some people set goals that are either too easy or too difficult. They lose that drive, which I think you have to have that right level of goal difficulty. I think feedback is really important. If you've got good feedback if you're on your own and it's just the kind of the knowledge of the results and how you're going and that reflection of how it's going, or if you've got a coach who can help give you feedback along the path, that's really powerful and will help you achieve your goals. There's lots of different things that can influence whether you achieve your goals. I think that even your personality, some people are just goal setting people. There's research which looks at this concept of core self-evaluations, and those individuals who have a real high sense of self-esteem and general efficacy, with general sort of confidence that they're the kind of people who believe they can do stuff, and general optimists tend to do better with their goals. So powerful approach is to play that detective and look into what's happened before and try and say, right, okay, this time the reason that you didn't achieve that goal is because you didn't use those implementation intentions. You said you were going to lose weight. Your goal was to lose 10 pounds, but it just went by the by because life got in the way. So this time we're going to attach, we're going to use an implementation intention. We're going to, when you go downstairs and switch the kettle on to make your morning coffee, you're going to do your 10 squats then. That's your trigger. And you can use that, all the knowledge and all the evidence that we have about effective goal setting and build it into that individualized approach.
Mm-hmm. I love this concept of the detective work, the goal setting detective work. That's not a phrase I've heard before, but I could see the power in doing that, regardless of where you end up. You nailed it. Good job. What worked? What came to fruition? Or I didn't quite hit it now, and that fits into what you talked earlier about the post event, the journaling, the reflecting, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
I love that. That's really valuable. Let's talk about outside of athletics. When we talk about performance enhancing in general, it tends to, because it's easy to measure, it's very objective, it's easy to say, let's talk about it with runners or cyclists or whatever it might be. Are these concepts applicable to personal, professional, educational pursuits?
Absolutely. If I go back to my PhD many years ago now, I was looking at the idea of skill transfer, of life skill transfer, and we looked at it in sports. We tried to say, what do kids learn when they play sport?
Oh,
and it really came from my own experience of being a young athlete. Obviously, I never made it. I never became a professional athlete. So I remember sitting in a seminar and a professor had come across from the States and was delivering this seminar, and it just got me thinking, what have I got from sport? I enjoyed it, no doubt about that, and had many fun hours on the tennis court and playing rugby, and I had a great time. But was that it? If I've not got a career out of it.
Sure.
I mean, I kind of did in the end. Is working in sports science, but I've never played professional sport, and and it made me ask that question: is that the only exit point from youth sport, if you like it, or is that the most productive thing that you can get out of youth sport, that you get a job as a professional athlete? And I think the answer to that was a pretty obvious, well, no. That there's lots of things you get from playing sport, from the obvious health effects of being physically active. We know that we don't have to play competitive sport, but just being physically active is beneficial. I started to ask that question of, if you've got your son, your daughter, brothers, sisters playing junior football or junior hockey or junior tennis, whatever, what do they get out of it? And what do they do when they're playing sport that can transfer into other areas? And it really opened up a quite a kind of can of worms, really, in that there's tons of stuff, teamwork, communication, the ability to compete without hatred, the ability to lose, the ability to win, all those things. They're the nature of the sport. But then you start saying, well, what skills do people use in sport that are valuable in other areas? And handling pressure is something that we do in every walk of life. And I think the skills that we're talking about, that a lot of people associate with sports psychology, are the same skills that enable people to thrive and to perform in the workplace, in the military, in the relationships at home, with loved ones, in retirement. They do cross over. So, your ability to set goals might help you run that sub 4-hour marathon. It could help you set up a business. It's the same process, and it can definitely apply in different areas. Using box breathing when you're about to take a penalty in a sporting event, box breathing, being able to control that sort of the autonomic nervous system control to help you relax and bring yourself down. That's going to help you way before a job interview. It's a skill that you can use if you're delivering a presentation and you feel a little bit anxious. So for sure, these skills, these strategies, they are not solely for sport. And if we actually look at the history of a lot of these things, they've come from occupation. Goal setting was not developed by sports psychologists. That's very much an industrial and organizational psychology technique. So there is absolutely, huge reciprocity between sport and all different life domains.
You mentioned box breathing. Some people might know what that is, but can you give us the basic sense, since you've thrown it out there a couple of times?
Yeah, sure thing. So box breathing, if I've got this fact correct, and if excuse me if I've got it wrong, but I think it was developed by the US Navy SEALs, used significantly, but by significantly more people than that now. But I think it was developed in the military. And effectively, you can visualize a box, a square, and you can imagine the horizontal lines are either inhale or exhale, and the vertical lines are just holding. So if you start in the top left-hand corner of that square and you go across that first horizontal, that's an inhale. So you inhale for a number of seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. I don't think it really matters, as long as it's not like a rapid breath in. So you breathe in for 2 or 3 seconds. You hold that breath for the same amount, so 2 or 3 seconds, and then you slowly exhale for the same amount of time, so 2 or 3 seconds, and then you hold, and then you inhale again. So it's a process of inhalation, holding, exhalation, holding, and the process. There's a neurological explanation for why it works. It is a part of your autonomic nervous system. The breathing, it influences your vagal tone and influences how your autonomic nervous system functions, and you feel more relaxed doing it. The origins were high pressure, probably high fear sort of situations. That sort of breathing can just help regulate those emotions, those physiological arousal states, and bring you into that sort of sense of equilibrium. Perfect. It definitely works. I use it all the time. It is a really effective technique, very brief, doesn't take much practice. yeah, I found it effective in those times when you might be feeling a little bit nervous. If you're doing a speech or you're doing a big presentation, something you can do really simply and helps you perform.
Perfect. All right. So typical person's listening, they're thinking, okay, he's giving me some tips here, but I've got this one thing. So I don't know, it may be personal, professional. We won't worry about the specifics, but are there a couple strategies you haven't already mentioned that you'd suggest as a starting point? So they're listening to you and they're saying, "Ooh, I think there's some real opportunity here." Are there one or two that you would say, start here? This is a great starter set beyond what you've already mentioned.
Tough question, but I think some really deep reflection of the why. So I think that's a good one to start off with. Is if your personal and professional life, you want a promotion, you want to run a marathon, you want to do a triathlon, you want to lose some weight, whatever it is that you're considering. First and foremost is have a really long look at yourself in the mirror and be honest and think, what's appealing about this? Why am I doing this? What is
so good?
What's my motivation? And the reason I say that is that when we're aiming for change, it's rarely a linear path. When we're trying to do something different, if we're trying to move to somewhere new, that we don't usually go there in a straight line. There's ups and downs. There's relapse. There's those spirals of relapse where you might, it's like a helter-skelter where you're spinning down, then you go back up again, spin down again. Having that really strong why can help you when you're in those troughs, when those things aren't going as you want them to. Equally, you can look at that question of why, and then it can maybe stimulate to think, actually, is this what I actually want? Am I just doing what people think I should do? Am I just a reflection of what expected of me? But actually, is it actually what I really, really want to do, or really what I am really interested in? So having that one, if I want to call it like a motivational audit, where you just really, really start thinking about it. Because if you want to run a 3-hour marathon, but actually when you start really looking into it and you realize that, you hate running, but you just want to do
now,
it.
Nobody hates running. Nobody hates running. Just kidding, everybody.
Sure. But, you look at it and you say, the reason I'm doing this is because Steve down the road has done it.
Right.
And I just want to beat Steve down the road. When it's raining and when it's cold and, you see Steve in front of his roaring fire, chilling out, you're not going to, it's going to be really difficult for you to get out and run in the cold and the wet. And, that's what I mean. Having that motivational audit, that sort of idea of why is it you're doing it? Are you doing it purely for esteem value, so that people will look at you in a different way? Are you looking to make a change because you want more money, because you want rewards? Is it that if you didn't do something, there'd be some kind of feeling of guilt, or you're avoiding something negative? So, the obvious one for that is I'm going running because if I don't, I feel guilty eating the biscuits and the cookies and the cakes, that sort of stuff. Are you doing it because it's just a reflection of your role in society, your job? So, military personnel, fire personnel, police, they might be doing lots of physical activity because that's just the nature of their identity. It's who they are. It's like the job that they do. And then all the way down to that other end, I actually love this stuff. It's me. That's who I am. That's, I couldn't live without going for a bike ride. That is my pleasurable activity. It's like watching a 3-year-old playing, that they just do it for no other reason than they just love it. If that's you and bike riding, that's great. And, you're going to go and do those sportives, you're going to do those races. And I think that's where I'd start, is having a real honest conversation with yourself and thinking, why am I trying to do something different? And once you've got that in place, there are other things you can move on to try and get you to the point where you want to be.
Okay, so we're really going down a great path here. How does that individual separate those? So it is part of their job, or it is part of what's expected of them, or they've been doing it for so long, it's automatic. How do they distinguish, is this really me versus is this just an extension of habit, society expectations, et cetera, et cetera?
I think it's easy to have someone along with you to help you.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got somebody who can maybe ask you challenging questions, be that a coach or some kind of mentor, or that would help. You can definitely do that. But I think this sort of approach doesn't have to be something that you do once. If it's a big thing that you're moving into, I'd say don't rush into it. Spend a month, fill out a journal, think about what things have you done in that day that have been important to you. What things have you done in that day that reflect the person that you want to become? What habits have you reinforced? What bad habits have crept in that maybe are the things that you don't really want to see anymore? And do it over a period of a month, 6 months, a year. And that's the kind of thing that's going to give you that self-awareness. And I've been asked this a few times, if we're talking about like elite sport, what's the one thing that separates the good from the great, or what do the elite athletes have that maybe the top 10 tennis player has but the top 500 player doesn't have? And there's no right answer to this question, but when I worked with elite performers in the military, in sport, in academia, some of the professors I've worked with have been elite performers in their own right. And I think self-awareness, it's just having that knowledge of what you do, what you're capable of, what you value, what you don't value. And that's not something that comes naturally to it doesn't come naturally to me.
Right.
And I think it takes time. And I think that maybe that journaling approach in lieu of a mentor or a coach who can ask those challenging questions, you can ask yourself those challenging questions. They're not always comfortable. That unpleasantness sometimes is the thing that can drive you to change. So yeah, I think that's how you could start to separate some of those things out, I think.
Okay, good. Excellent. Loving this. What are some of the things that have surprised you in your career as a human performance researcher? What did you come across where you went, wait, what?
Do you know, I think that the biggest one, which is, it seems so obvious now when we look at it. So in the last 2 years, I've really kind of had a deep dive into sleep and fatigue, because I've been doing a lot of sleep work, mostly in the defense sector, and met a lot of people who work in sleep research and talked to some real world leading experts. And you sat there talking to them, and I kind of sat there thinking, why have I never done this before? Why have I never sleep is so obvious that it's something we spend a third of our lives doing for the most part. Everybody pretty much recognizes when they've had a good sleep, that you can think how great it feels when you've had a really good sleep. Equally, if you've ever traveled across a time zone, how bad you feel with jet lag, or I've got 2 young kids, and when they keep you awake, I was camping at the weekend and I've got maybe 3 hours sleep because of my 2-year-old and my 6-year-old, and you feel terrible the next day. That's the biggest light bulb moment where I thought, this is so obvious that your ability to get adequate sleep, first and foremost, is so important. And it explains so many of my own experiences of like, oh yeah, why didn't I perform well that day? And then you kind of think, well, actually, yeah, it's because I was up all night cramming for an exam, or I was in a different bed and it wasn't comfortable. So that's the big thing for me, is that I can't believe there's not more research on sleep in human performance. It's quite a niche area, and we know it affects mood. We know it affects your, in terms of cognitive abilities, your reaction time, vigilance, executive functions, and then your emotional regulation. Typically people feel irritable when they've not slept. Less sort of optimistic, less driven. And yeah, that's the big surprise, is that there isn't more of it, and that it surprised me that I'd never caught on. It took me 36 years.
It took the world. I mean, it used to be a badge of honor. Oh yeah, I only need 4 hours of sleep. Well,
Yeah. It
okay,
still
if you
is.
want to perform at 60%, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, there is, don't get me wrong. In the military, there is some training that happens where people are sleep deprived, and sure enough, they won't learn as well. But that's kind of not the point. It's in that environment where sleep deprivation is part of the job. There's no getting around it. Training when sleep deprived allows that individual to recognize the point when they are
Yes.
getting sleep deprived. So there is value to it in some respects, but yeah, to use it as a badge of honor, I think is crazy. And I look at my own experience as a student, and then my 10 years working in higher education. Those students who do wear it as a badge of honor. Yeah, I was up all night
Right.
cramming. I managed to do my essay, my last essay. I just didn't sleep for 48 hours. And then I'm looking back and thinking, well, yeah, sure enough, I can tell,
Right. Right.
because it's not
Exactly.
very good.
Right.
You didn't do well in the exam because you've not recalled any information because
Right.
you were sleep deprived.
Right.
And yeah, so that's the big one that I just can't believe it's not.
Finally.
Yeah, it seems to take so long. I mean, I started a sports science degree in 2000, so 20 years ago is when I started my university education. I didn't do anything. I did no sleep, no in terms of studying it.
Right.
I did plenty of sleep sometimes
Right.
in the back of the lectures, but I never studied sleep. And then I did a master's degree, never studied sleep. Did a PhD, never studied sleep. Postdoctoral work, never came into it. It was only when I moved out of academia into defense that it came onto the radar, and I thought, yeah, this is really, really important.
Yeah. Excellent. Good. Great example. So now looking forward, what are some of the advances you see around the bend that folks should be tuning into? Maybe you've seen them, but the general population really, it hasn't bubbled up to the top yet in terms of human performance.
Yeah, there's some really interesting science moving forward. I think there's we can look at just technologies and things like understanding the human genome and the connections in the brain, and we know there's a lot of individual variability in a lot of these skills and the performance states, and I think we're starting to understand them, and we're starting to find ways of can we augment human performance by other technologies. So things like that, the vagal nerve stimulation. I was reading a paper about that earlier. I don't think the technology is there right now, but it probably will be within a short period of time. Can we change how the metabolism of the brain? Are we at a place where we can use that science to change how we think? And I think right now we probably can't. And I think there's a lot of technology which is missold, which suggests that people try and buy these things because they think it can work. The theory is sometimes valuable and it is worthy, but the technology isn't quite there yet. But I think within the next 20 to 30 to maybe even 50 years, I think we will start to see some of these technologies come through. In a sporting context, the question then is it any is if we put an electrode, we could put it on the skin of the temple, is that any different to someone taking EPO?
Right.
And are we now moving into a neuro doping, that sort of thing? But I think we definitely can. The caveat to that is, I think there's the assumption that people are operating at 98% already, and if we give them that technology, that headband that can synchronize their brainwaves, or that's going to get them to 100%. And I think the reality is that most people are currently operating at maybe 60%.
Absolutely.
And actually, there's loads of things that we can do in lieu of that technology. We can make sure that people are healthy. You're not going to run a 3-hour marathon if you're pre-diabetic and you're overweight or you're smoking. So we need to get people up to that level. Then we can look at human performance.
Right. Get the cornerstones first.
Yeah. If someone's sleep deprived, that they've got a sleep disorder, we need to go to someone who's a sleep medic, and we can treat that sleep disorder, and then we can look at human performance on top of that. So that if we can get people those, like you say, those cornerstones set first, and then we can think about human performance. But even so, a good solid diet. I'm not a nutritionist, but a food first approach, I think, it makes sense to me as a non-nutritionist. Though, if you can get the nutrients that you need in a good rounded diet, then supplementation, I think it makes sense that you could do it through food. But as I say, I'm not a nutritionist, so there might be counter arguments to that. But yeah, a good solid diet, good sleep, looking after your mental fitness, which I think is part of that idea of that just an audit of yourself, journaling, reflective activity, clearing out the file drawer. It's like your brain is full of stuff, and every now and then you need to clean the office. You need to go through it, and you need to clean it out. And I think those sorts of things, if we focus on those, your performance is probably going to go up.
Yeah.
Quite, no matter. I'm not just talking about sport. Your performance in life will improve. This is long before you get the fancy headband that can somehow influence your brain waves. There's lots we can do right now.
I think it's such a great reminder. We just did a feature video on that topic. That, doggone it, stop messing with the little tiny things that make a 0.5% difference when you haven't addressed the thing that makes a 12% difference. Come on, folks. Yeah. It comes back to move, fuel, rest, connect. It's those cornerstones. So well done. Yeah, bring it back. Don't
get me wrong. I love technology.
Sure, we all do.
I'm a scientist, and I love the data. And I wear a smartwatch, and it gives me all the data, and I use it every day, and I love it. And the device that I use, there's little add-ons that you can buy, and I was looking at one the other day, and it gives you all this data about your running, your running technique. It gives you like how much is on your left foot, your right foot.
Yeah. I've used that.
I'm going to buy this. I'm going to buy this. And then I thought, actually, there's so much more I can do to make me a better
I need to
runner.
Run more.
yeah. I could just time on foot.
Right.
Just getting out. Just that will make me a better runner. Right. Before I have to go and spend £100 on a device. Right. That there's lots of things that are in our control right now that we can do to improve our performance, that we don't have to shell out. We don't have to buy the latest technology, or often we just need to look at what we currently have and say, right, what do I have at my disposal that I am not currently leveraging, that I'm not using efficiently, and can I make those tweaks first? Right. And your performance will go up. Right. It's almost guaranteed.
That's such a great reminder. All right, let's flip the mirror around a little bit. How about your own life? Are there certain strategies? You're telling us all this great stuff that we can be doing. Is there something that in your life right now you've been struggling? Not something you've mastered. Don't tell us how this worked great last month, but one that you're kind of like, you know what? I'm kind of struggling in this area, but here's a technique I'm starting to use, and I'm optimistic it's going to make a difference.
You know me, Brad. I'm by no means perfect. So, I'm a huge believer in the power of education, and I am constantly trying to learn, and I'm always not wanting to be overly dramatic, but I am literally always trying to learn something. So if I'm walking to a train station, I've got a podcast on or an audio book. I love not documentaries, and I'm trying to learn stuff. And I think, it comes back to, I think Aristotle said, education is an ornament in prosperity and a refuge in adversity. And I think I really believe that the education, when you're in those dips, that having knowledge and spending time to learn means you might not use it at that point in time, but there often will be times when it's useful, and you're stocking the shelves of knowledge and education, so that down the line you've got something to use. So that's what I do. I spend my days just trying to gather information, and I love talking to people. I get the most information. The best education for me is in conversation with other people. So I love reaching out to people and spending time learning from other people, and not just people who share your own opinion. I think it's good to be challenged. It's good to look at different ways of thinking. You don't have to agree with them, but it's really useful to listen to other people and try and develop yourself that way. So yeah, right now, probably not the fittest I've been. I'm not as physically active as I probably would like to be. So yeah, a lot of the stuff I'm listening to and learning about is like, what can I do to get to that place that I want to be that more physically active there, a good role model to my kids. And the education that I've had over the years has helped me recognize, for example, the stages of change. What stage are you in? What's the value of taking the stairs versus the lift? I've studied that sort of stuff as a postgraduate student. It has a knock-on effect. 10, 15 years after studying exercise psychology, I still always take the stairs if they're available to me. So it's influenced my behavior 15 years later. Before that, I probably would have taken the lift, but it was that education which really stimulated that behavior change for me. So I think that's the big thing. It's learning, it's understanding. We can almost come back to that goal setting example. A lot of people know the SMART acronym and they will use the SMART acronym. The nuts and bolts of goal setting go so much deeper than that. And I think educating yourself and learning more about those skills allows you to be that detective. It allows you to, because you understand and you've learned, it allows you to pick those experiences apart. And I think that it comes down to, education for me it's changing the way that you think. It's a change in the way that you see the world and your place within the world. So it's not just about reading books and retaining information. It is fundamentally changing how you interact with your environment. And yeah, that's the big one for me. Just learn as much as you can, stand on the shoulders of giants, as it were. Those great authors, you might not write the great book, but you can certainly stand on their shoulders and apply those great words.
Love it. Last question, final words of wisdom, just wide open, something we haven't covered, anything for coaches trying to help their clients, or maybe folks listening that are trying to help their friends, family members, their kids, anything in terms of this human performance that I've missed with the questions I've asked you.
I think maybe to reiterate something that we've talked about, I think it's a relationship endeavor. Human performance is I don't know of anyone that can perform to their best in isolation. I think that you are with people that even
so good.
You've got the gold medalists. They've got a support team. They've got a family. They've got parents who helped them as they were coming through. Everyone, it's a social experience, and I think that my biggest achievements in life, I always think, I haven't done that on my own, that I couldn't have got to that position without hundreds of people who've helped me along the way. And I think that's where, reaching out to people, both, in person, talking to people who are close to you, but, reaching out to people through reading their words and listening to their podcasts. And, it doesn't have to be a reciprocal conversation. You can learn from other people in different ways, and I really do believe that that's the key to success. If I want to be that grandiose, but yeah, just it's working with other people, and I think those relationships are key. And if you can build those really strong relationships, you find that great things happen.
So good. This was fantastic. Obviously, I knew this was going to be fantastic. I've known you for years. You've had a big, big impact on my life. What's the best way for folks to follow you? Instagram, Twitter? What's your preference with that?
So I'm on both. So on Twitter, it's Dr. M.I. Jones. On Instagram, there's my recent Instagram is just called Op Human Performance.
OP.
So you can OP Human Performance, all one word. So yeah, you can follow me there. Just reach out, ask questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is fantastic.
Great. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, Brad.
Well, now you can see why my time as a PhD student was so valuable, can't you? Thank you again to Dr. Martin Jones, and thank you to you for tuning into the #1 podcast for health and wellness coaching. And an extra thank you to those of you who have shared it with others. Next week's guest is Dr. Andrew Miller, the author of the fascinating book titled On Not Being Someone Else. It was one of my favorite conversations, and I think you'll really enjoy it. If you're a subscriber over at the YouTube coaching channel, which you can find at youtube.com/coaching channel, we'd love your suggestions. What topics do you want us to cover? We recently published our 60th video, and we've designed some specific playlists. So if you're looking for something like things on coaching tools or human performance or the business of coaching, you can access that series without having to look through all 60. But in terms of topics, this is your chance to nudge us into providing what information you want without you having to spend a dime. Now, it's our chance to move toward better than yesterday with a fresh batch of ideas and application, but it's up to us to put them into practice, starting right now. This is Dr. Bradford Cooper of the Catalyst Coaching Institute signing off. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst Health, Wellness, and Performance Coaching Podcast, or maybe over on the new YouTube coaching channel.